Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, dear friends, uh, first of all, I would like to welcome you to this webinar uh, on open science beyond open access for and with communities. And thank you for making yourself available for this very important series of consultations that is taking place globally. And here in the Pacific, this is the one that we expect to take some feedback from um, for the UNESCO consultations. It's part of the UNESCO consultations. But I will not go further into that. I would like to immediately hand over the floor to Shahbaz Khan, Dr. Shahbaz Khan, who will be doing the welcoming and the and make some opening remarks.
Thank you very much. It's a very important day today as this webinar on open science beyond open access for and with the community for the Pacific states is a very important one. I wish to acknowledge the role of UNESCO Office for Pacific States, and especially Ms. Nisha's leadership, Canadian Commission for UNESCO, and UNESCO co-chairs in community-based research and social responsibility in higher education, which are actively collaborating not only in this webinar, but with wider further consultations. And this is certainly helping us move towards open science recommendation for the General Conference in 2021. I wish to acknowledge Dr. Mahindra Reddy, who is our minister, finally joining from Fiji. He has many backgrounds. I'm so impressed by his breadth of knowledge. And Dr. Siu Toati, the Chief Executive Officer for Scientific Research Organization of Samoa. And certainly this is an important area for him. And of course, Dr. Rajesh Tandon, the founder, president for the Participatory Research in Asia, Priya, and of course, the co-chair for this very important initiative. And working actively with the UniTwin. And Dr. Rajendra, you just heard, advisor for science. He has played a very important role. So certainly these are not the usual time for us in terms of where the world is. COVID is still going on, and that's where the global consensus on open science is a critical consensus, as science has to play a role in global health and in this environmental crisis which is going on. The pandemic has demonstrated that there is a lack of capacity in scientific infrastructure in terms of also collaboration. There are digital divides, and we need to work very actively in this health crisis. So we in UNESCO, under the leadership of ADG Science, on 30th March, organized a critical meeting in which 77 ministers from the region and many eminent colleagues joined. So the consensus was we must pool knowledge, we must reduce gaps, we must mobilize decision makers, researchers, innovators, and we should provide access to data, research findings, and very importantly, no one should be left behind. There has to be better link between science and policy, and there must be a science which should go beyond borders. So this is all in the context of today's webinar as well. I'm sure you will agree that to develop a global consensus on open science is critical, timely. UNESCO member states have requested a transparent process which should lead to recommendation on open science. So there has been an online global consultation, online survey for inputs for 4 months from February to June 2020. And the member states have widely disseminated, UNESCO field offices have contributed, also UNESCO chairs and centers have actively contributed. So through this process, there has been a lot of data which has been gathered. In the Asia Pacific region, we organized also on 15th September 2020, a consultation which clearly highlighted the issues of infrastructure, the platforms which are missing. There is a need for international platform which can bring the wider recognition to the open science and also bring all the key academies of sciences, the universities, as well as making sure the people who need such knowledge. Such national platforms will help build national capacity and also provide a science ecosystem. So for Pacific is very special that we need to have the consideration of the Pacific countries properly considered. So there would be a chance to continue this process till 2021 January on the recommendation, and this will be followed by further consultations in July, and of course leading up to the 41st session of the General Conference for the adoption of the recommendation. So from today, we are very, very grateful to our office in Pacific under the leadership of Ms. Nisha, and also very importantly, the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, the UNESCO Chair, and all those colleagues who have joined today. Please express your views, which are important to be captured, so this can be part of the process. So with that, I thank you for organizing this very, very timely webinar, and we look forward to how can we work together to make open science really open, from open access, open data, and getting rid of the digital divides, and very importantly, build capacities locally, but those capacities which are interconnected with the whole world. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the keynote speeches which will be following and the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shahbaz Khan, Shahbaz as we call you. So Shahbaz has just very briefly introduced or just made reference to the speakers and appreciating their attendance. I would like to now go ahead with the agenda proper, whereby our first speaker is Dr. Rajesh Tandon. Dr. Rajesh Tandon is joining us from New Delhi, India. Dr. Tandon is an internationally acclaimed leader and practitioner of participatory research and development. He is founder president of Participatory Research in Asia, which is PRIA, one of the strengths behind this particular event. The Global Center for Participatory Research and Training since 1982. He was appointed co-chair of the prestigious UNESCO Chair on Community-Based Research and Social Responsibility in Higher Education for 2 terms from 2012 to 2020. He is an electronics engineer. His starting career was an electronics engineer. Dr. Tandon has served on numerous expert committees of Government of India, the UGC, the UN, Commonwealth, and World Bank. And in 2015, the Indian Adult Education Association awarded Dr. Tandon the Nehru Literacy Award for his distinguished work on gender issues. The Government of India honored him with prestigious award in social justice in March 2007. The University of Victoria, Canada awarded Dr. Tandon the degree of Doctor of Law, honoris causa in June 2008. Sorry about the wording. He is the first Indian to be inducted in the International Adult and Continuing Education, the Hall of Fame. So from this brief introduction, you can know that Dr. Tandon is really expert in many fields. So today we are very fortunate to have him. So I hand over the floor to Dr. Tandon to deliver your opening remarks and introduce the paper that is in discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rajendra, and thank you very much for Nishaji, the Office of UNESCO in the Pacific, for hosting this important discussion in the Pacific region. I'm thankful to Dr. Shahbaz Khan for his very warm initial introduction, and grateful that Honorable Minister Dr. Mahendra Reddy and Professor Sosu Toati have joined this panel. The UNESCO Chair on Community-Based Research and Social Responsibility in Higher Education has been partnering with various UNESCO offices, additionally in Canadian Commission for UNESCO's support, to convene 11 webinars in different regions on this important issue of open science. And I want to therefore be thankful to all of you. In my role as the president of the Asia South Pacific Adult Education Association, I traveled extensively in the Pacific region in the 1990s up until 2004, the last time I traveled. So I've been to Fiji 2-3 times, I've been to Samoa, I've been to Papua New Guinea, and Solomon Islands, and I am exceptionally thankful to our UNESCO office in the Pacific for making this consultation possible. We will be doing a separate consultation for South Asia on November 17, but this is particularly important given what our own thinking has been on science and its openness. So we have seen the statement that we had prepared, which has been shared with all of you. I'm going to try and share a quick PowerPoint which highlights some of those themes. And let me see if I succeed in doing so. Otherwise, my colleague Surjit may help me. There it is. Open science beyond open access. For and with communities, a step towards the decolonization of knowledge. That's the theme of the analysis this group of people have done, led by our UNESCO chair and in partnership with several others. Now, as we all know, these are abnormal times. These are not normal times. So normal science is under, if I may use the phrase, abnormal virus. What it means? It means that in the last 8-9 months, in this 2020, never before science has been under such public gaze as virus spreads. Community leaders, local politicians, students, academics of different persuasion, policymakers, they're all wondering what is going on with science. And therefore, attention to science is uniquely focused in this year, and it is so timely, therefore, that UNESCO is taking this initiative on open science at this juncture. Science is facing politics of evidence. You have seen in many countries, I don't know that much about each country in the region that you are all part of, you know much better, but what evidence scientists are producing, they do not necessarily find policy response as supportive. You are familiar with the debate on masks, for example, or the kind of medicine that scientists are facing scrutiny in public for treatments. All kinds of treatments have been recommended. Scientists are not sure which ones are working, but from homemade recipes to Ayurvedic treatments to hydrochloroquine to all kinds of things are there, and they are facing scrutiny. That does it work? Will it work? And latest, of course, is the science of vaccines is facing competing truths. Whose vaccine is out? Whose vaccine is about to be out? Whose vaccine will go through all the rounds of testing? Which vaccines will be certified by WHO? And which vaccines have got which kind of investment from philanthropists or corporate tycoons? And which kinds of vaccines will be available for free? And as we sit on November 3, God knows which stage vaccines are, and there are competing vaccines in the market. And again, science is being questioned about the veracity of these claims about vaccine about to hit the market next week or next month or early next year. So science is under scrutiny. Scientists are facing questioning. Science establishments are being closely watched and scrutinized, not just by policymakers, but by public at large. So open science has been generally talked about in the last decade as open access. And many international agencies, particularly if you look at European Union, has been for last 20 years promoting what they call responsible research and innovation, RRI. and under which they insist that all research funded by European Union should be open access. And what do they mean by open access? They mean that it should be open access to fellow scientists around the world. All right. But open access to fellow scientists is a historical practice. Up until mid-19th century, everything was open. And it was believed that research producing is meant for common good and not for private gain by the researchers or their research funders. This issue of patenting and using knowledge for profit actually began speeding up in the last century, but more so since 1980s, when global consensus on disinvestment of higher education increased and research funding gradually moved in the hands of private sector. So research investment, even from public sources, would have a matrix of saying how many patents you have made and how many of those patents have been converted into the commercial products. So linking knowledge for profit, this has resulted in a very interesting phenomena where less than 10 internationally multinational educational journals and educational companies are controlling the patenting of all journal articles and published books. Even though individual researchers do the labor, their labor is extracted and profits are made by these companies. So under the name of open access, now you can publish provided you pay for it. And last month, I was approached by somebody, a publisher of repute, to publish one of my articles. I said, I believe only in open access. And he said, well, 3,500 euro, you pay, it will be open access for 5 years. This pay to publish. Actually, this open access cost is being included in research funding proposals these days. And interestingly, the same funders who insist on open access are willing to pay for publishing under open access. And as I mentioned, this is entirely controlled by less than 10 companies and professionals and journal houses, educational, which are all based in Northern Europe and North America. None of these journals from the southern countries have the same reputation. In fact, our own research institutions expect our researchers to publish in these so-called very important journals, which are controlled by the few in the north. But open access is also needed beyond fellow scientists. Open access is meant for practitioners. If you take the case of the current pandemic, then open access is needed by nurses, by paramedics, by even families who could learn about the science in a way that they could prevent the spread of the virus in their neighborhoods, in their communities. So civil society organizations, non-science professionals, academics, but outside the academia, many paraprofessionals, many service providers also need access. So open access is currently highly distorted, and it has to be truly open access to everybody. That is what brings us to this question of science is open only for access to scientists, or what does openness mean? Is it open to society? Is science open to society? Is this scrutiny of science that has been taking place during the pandemic, is it going to continue, and will it make science more open and responsive to society at large? So there is now increasingly an issue of science citizenship. Is science part of society? In many of our countries, decisions about science policy and public financing of science research is actually not even discussed in parliament. So it is a group of very senior scientists who discuss this with key ministers, and society at large remains unaware of the basis and criteria for development of science and its application. Then the question comes, science is, if it is open to society, then what is the purpose of science? Is the purpose of science to engage with public to maximize profits, which is resulting in increased inequalities in all our societies? Many of you may have read that in many countries during 8 months of pandemic, inequality increased. It increased in my country, it increased in sub-Saharan Africa, and it is increasing in Europe too. Or is the purpose of science, therefore, also to contribute to social justice? And in recent terms, is the purpose of science also to do no harm to our environment and ecology and make science accountable to creating sustainable and resilient communities and societies? The third issue about openness to society is that bulk of the global science, which is acknowledged and certified, is happening in predominantly English language and a few other European languages like French or Spanish. But we know that knowledge is culturally and linguistically contextual. Knowledge depends on the context. Knowledge is developed through the practices in a cultural and social context. Therefore, when concepts and theories in European languages are the only ones which are certified, valued, and legitimized, they tend to create a disconnect with society, which is both linguistic disconnect. Professors in some countries can only teach in higher education in English language. Most higher education research in India is done in English language. But 95% of our people don't read or write or think in English. So disconnect is obvious. Then there is a digital disconnect, and Shahbaz has already spoken about it. I don't want to belabor that point. The issue of openness to society has been gathering momentum in the last decade. Our own UNESCO chair is an example on this. Community-based participatory research is an increasingly popular methodology of co-construction of knowledge in partnership with communities. There are a Global University Network for Innovation, a UNESCO supported institution, and a global network of higher education has been promoting what has come to be known as engaged scholarship. There are in Europe, continental Europe, particularly science shops, which are partnerships between academics and local civil society. Teloris Network has been promoting, it's a network of presidents of universities and has been promoting community engaged scholarship. And National Coordinating Center for Public Engagement in UK is another example. There are many other examples in Latin America, in Africa, I'm sure in your region, in the Pacific as well. The point I'm making is that the engaged scholarship is as legitimate and valued field that is emerging, which makes science openness to society. So the point I'm making is that there are other knowledges, there are other forms of knowledge which have not been acknowledged by modern science, which has been historically over the last 3 centuries Eurocentric. These knowledge systems have survived and flourished in our communities. In many parts of the world, there are, not just the Chinese knowledge system or the Indian knowledge system, every society has its own. And indigenous knowledges rooted in indigenous cultures and indigenous languages have been a very critical part. Is science open to other forms of knowledge? Or is open science only open to Eurocentric science and knowledge systems? This is the important question that we have been posing, because we believe that pandemic has clarified once again the importance of harnessing and using knowledge which is locally produced, locally stored, and locally utilized. In fact, many communities have been able to prevent spread of the virus by using local knowledge based on local practices. But that knowledge system, that store of vibrant knowledge, is not yet seen as legitimate knowledge in the context of conversations on open science. So our recommendation, therefore, arising from this to UNESCO, to the communities, which are the advisory council, which is formulating the open science, is to promote policies which make open science as a co-constructed knowledge system accountable to society. Science research and scientific research institutions should diversify governance of their boards, and that governance system should be such that it includes multiple voices and multiple diverse experiences, including indigenous voices. The funding institutions, UNESCO should recommend that funding institutions promote integrated science, which brings best of all traditions, the modern European science, the indigenous knowledge science, and does not delegitimize that, in fact, flourishes the integration. We also recommend that UNESCO should include in the recommendations of open science investment in building capacity of young researchers so that they are open to these conversations that we are having. In most cases, training of young researchers in our academic institutions does not make them understand or open to other forms of knowledge systems, does not make them open to accountability questions to society in general, and it only makes them open to their own fellow academics in a very limited, narrow scientific discipline. So these are our key recommendations, and more importantly, we look forward to a conversation and your comments and experiences from our colleagues in the Pacific region. Thank you very much, and sorry for this disruption, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tandon. We really appreciate you sharing your vast knowledge, experience, expertise, and your views, as well as the recommendations that you have made in your paper. So we'll talk a bit more about that in the open discussion that will take place later on. But ladies and gentlemen, as you know, we have two very honored invited speakers this afternoon. And I'd like to apologize to both Dr. Mahendra Reddy and Dr. Tuati for delaying this thing a little bit. I know you both have very tight time schedules, and so sorry about that. So we'll move straight ahead with our next and the first speaker, expert speaker, I would say. And so first of all, first I would like to invite Dr. Mahendra Reddy, Fiji's Minister for Agriculture, Waterways and Environment. Dr. Reddy has served as Minister for Education, Heritage and Arts since September 2014 and until July 2017. And in December 2017, he was reappointed to Cabinet Minister for Waterways, and in August 2018, he took on an indeed challenging position as portfolio of environment. In late 2018, he was appointed or reappointed to Cabinet as Minister for Agriculture, Rural and Maritime Development, Waterways and Environment. Prior to joining politics, he has served as in academia, first at the University of the South Pacific as lecturer in development studies. In 1998, rising up to the rank of Associate Professor of Economics. In 2000, Head of School of Economics. In 2008, he joined FIT and later Fiji National University as the Dean of the College of Business, Hospitality and Tourism Studies. He has also served as Chair of Fiji Commerce Commission and as a Director in the Board of Reserve Bank of Fiji. So Dr. Reddy, thank you very much for taking your valuable time to be with us. I now invite you to deliver your address and speak on the subject as freely as you may wish to. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Rajen. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you, Rajen. I want to thank you and Nisha in particular for inviting me to be part of this discussion on this important topic. I believe it's about open science rather than more on open access. Science is about knowledge creation and knowledge dissemination. And no one or no institution or no country should have a monopoly on knowledge. Now, starting from open access, coming from an academic background, we were struggling when we were in academia to have access to knowledge created by scientists all over the world. And that problem is still existing now. I mean, I'm here in government now, and my colleagues as well, we are required to make policies which are supposed to be very effective, policies which are supposed to be meaningful, policies which are supposed to be efficiently delivered, efficiency in terms of delivery, in terms of resource utilization. But the people who are creating this knowledge, are not providing that knowledge to us. Who are these people? Basically, the academia and the intellectuals. We don't see transformation of the academia, the academics, into intellectuals much. I mean, much to the extent that we would want to, even though there are intellectuals in the universities. There are a lot of academics in the universities, but we don't see a real effort being made to by these academics to move and become intellectuals and assist us in making difference in policy making. I haven't seen, in Fiji, we have got 3 universities: the University of Fiji, the Fiji National University, the University of the South Pacific, and their research institutions. I haven't seen any effort made by the universities to open up access of the database that they have to us policymakers. I'm struggling to have access to journals, journal articles, to assist me in fine-tuning my speeches, fine-tuning my articles, and of course assisting me in policy making and developing policies. Coming from academia, I can see the enormous amount of material out there in various data platforms, the EBSCOhost, JSTOR, to name a few. Of course, I'll be more biased towards economics and commerce databases. But look, I have to, in fact, I wrote to one VC some time back when I was Minister of Education, and asking him to give me access to database, and said, okay, we need to look at how to give you as an external member, etc. I had a few times, spoke to my former colleagues, and I don't know, to use their access and log into and access some of the general database. I mean, that kind of why I'm saying that demonstrates how much thirst I have to access this database so that I can get contemporary research that has been done in these various areas, and now on agriculture that I'm, and environment and waterways that I'm dealing with. Now, we haven't dealt with that particular hurdle of accessing final output. Now we're talking about open science. While I want to really thank Nisha and UNESCO, for starting this discourse on how to get there in terms of opening up science information, which is much broader than open access. It's about methodology, opening up methodology or scrutiny to methodology, sharing data, sharing software, entire process, allowing people to scrutinize the entire methodology, and then converging on a particular data and let the data speak and let everyone analyze the data. So we are, to me, I am now struggling at this stage where I don't have access to the database platforms that already institutions in the country are holding on to. Now, when I was the education minister, I was saying that, look, and when I was at the Fiji National University, the Dean of the Business College, I was saying that, look, let's share the database, let's get together, rather than individual universities subscribing and the poor universities are not able to have access to this database. Now, amongst themselves, they're not willing to share the data, I mean, the database, which has got final output, publications. Now, I'm wondering, we're talking about, opening up the entire research process, the scientific methodology. I don't know, I think we are far behind in terms of getting to that stage. Let's first share the output. Now, I'm going to come to that, how that could be possible, but let me then first shed some light on some of the challenges and stumbling blocks that we might come across. The issue of patenting, that is something that we need to discuss about how patenting could be an obstacle to opening up access to methodology and formula, data, etc. The issue about competition, I just alluded to, about competition amongst universities, and which is resulting in them not opening the database. They're marketing to students, saying that you come here, you will have this particular database access, etc., etc. So competition amongst businesses, the private sector. There's so much data held in captive by private sector. What are we gonna give to them to motivate them to start sharing the data, the formulas, the methodologies, their business secrets? So I think when we are discussing about open science, we can't ignore the business sector, the private sector, because they hold certain kinds of data, which is very important for policy making and ultimately improving people's livelihoods. So let's not lose sight, because if we have some difficulty, some misunderstanding, then go back and see what is all this knowledge about. Why are we creating knowledge? What is the primary ultimate objective? Then we will say that, look, when you're talking about open science, there are various cross-sections of the community where data is held. Business sector should be part of this as well. NGOs, civil society organizations, religious groups, etc. Then we also have in Pacific in particular about indigenous knowledge. How do we open up? How do we get them to share? Again, the issue of sequencing. UNESCO has finally got us to start talking about it. This is step number one. We're not going to get this done overnight in a year's time or 2 years' time or 5 years' time, absolutely no way. But what are the kinds of knowledge and who are the players that we want them to be dealt with in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. The sequencing is very important. Excuse me. Then the issue about social and societal responsibility. How do we get society to open up to what are some of the social norms that we need to be mindful of? Very important is also in this process of sequencing, we kind of look at what are some of the public goods in policy making. Public goods comes first, then we look at private goods. So I think we need to identify what are some of the public goods. There is issue about regional blocks. We could contribute towards developing of regional blocks, because open science in some way could contribute to borderless countries. So this is something that we need to look at, because policymakers might question that is there an issue of sovereignty being challenged. So let's put these things on the table so that we can have deeper discussion and maybe working position papers develop on these areas. Again, we must ensure that open science does not compromise the quality of output. I'm very worried when I hear people saying that, you pay and we'll publish. In the entire academia, that is a no-no. I mean, of course, I know there are some journals which are charging fees for publication, but again, we need to ensure that we don't open up a new, totally way of getting people, or academia or academic research institution to publish. At the moment, universities have their own list of journals and outlets, and they're ranked and points are given. Again, some institutions, some countries may question, will open science encourage free riders? So that is something that we need to, when we develop the framework of open science, we need to again say that what will be the contribution given the status of the country, the level of development of the country, so that, from day go, there's no issue about any free riders. We need to identify what are the common pool of resources we're talking about that will be part of open science. Open access is very clear. We're talking about the final output, but open access, open science is a totally different ball of game. So, I mean, we might be jumping the gun. I mean, for me, we are jumping the gun. We don't have open access. We're talking about open science. But look, let's talk about, I mean, UNESCO has got this discussion, discourse on open science. Let's talk about it, and maybe, eventually it'll be open access that we need to deal with, and then open science. Again, of course, we will be dismantling the monopolization of knowledge, which is very critical for the development and advancement of any country. Any country's progress depends on knowledge creation, and we don't want to duplicate if the knowledge is relevant to the other countries as well. So, and eventually, the knowledge gap that exists there is what we will be able to, fix and enhance and push the frontier in the country. Now, so how do we make this possible? I think we need to make data on regional goods. In the first step, phase one, biodiversity, resources, fisheries stock, environment, climate change, etc., publicly available, so that policymakers and managers, researchers can be well informed. Again, I want to stress that if you go and look at any Pacific Island countries, talk to any policymaker. I'm talking about, when I say policymaker, I'm basically talking about the legislature, not the executive arm. None of us are being given research output. Basically, there's no link between research and policy making. Tell me, if can any university give me evidence apart from the public lecture, conferences, and seminars that they're doing? What have they done in terms of the direct contribution towards policy making? When did they develop this paper that they are publishing in this high-ranked journals? Come and say, Minister, Dr. Reddy, we have published this paper in agriculture, in this journal, in Oxford Journal of Agriculture, economic theory. Can we present it, another version, palatable to your executive? So look, I think the fundamentals are missing. Again, enormous work have been done by university, the academia, and I want to say thank you. I don't want to ruffle them now. I don't want to get into any trouble now. But I'm saying, look, I mean, we can do more. The amount of money that we are giving, the grant money that government is giving, we can do more in terms of them influencing policy making. Number of seminars have come down. Number of conferences have come down. Of course, this is a different period now this year. But even then, last year before, that kind of discourse and debate that used to happen in universities is not happening at that level. So we need to ensure that the link is strengthened and in their contribution to policy making. They make the effort, whether what we take, how much we take, whether we take, that's a different matter. And we should ensure that there is dismantling of monopolization of knowledge. So regional governments need to sign off open access and data declarations and agreements. So that is something that we need to establish. We need to, at government level, we need to agree on, and there should be a regional agreement on that. And again, as I said, to start off, you look at regional goods, regional public goods, for example, in biodiversity, fisheries, etc. Agree on regional projects. We need to agree on regional projects. So when you agree on a regional project, again, the entire region will have access to the entire process, the scientific methodology from theorizing, from framework to data collection, analysis, and output, etc. There will be no issue in terms of a region accepting the findings of that. So we need to, again, develop skills to really effectively deal with this issue of sharing knowledge, sharing methodology, the entire science that we're talking about. So capacity building work will be required, and consortium of funders needs to be identified and pulled in to get us to go through the various phases. I think probably I will stop there, and if there's anything, I'll come later on, come in again. But I want to say that I want to thank Nisha of UNESCO and Rajan for at least getting us to talk about this, and I'm sure there are others here from various universities listening in. Please, I have a lot of respect for universities and academia, but I'm saying more can be done so that we can make policy making more sharp and effective. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, for sharing some of your very candid views. And that's why when I introduced you, I said, please share openly as you would like to. Of course, you have raised several issues, I think speaking more from your wide experience as a minister in government now, and before that as an academic at USP. So rather than me commenting on anything, I think we'll, since we started late, we'll move on to our next speaker, and then we'll raise and I'll allow other people to actually comment and add to and even ask questions to Dr. Reddy. The next honor speaker amongst us is Seuseu Dr. Joseph Edward Tawati. Dr. Tawati is the Chief Executive Officer for the Scientific Research Organization of Samoa, an organization that deals with a range of research activities relating to agriculture, health, and the environment. He was a consultant for the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries, Samoa, in particular the Crops Division, where he took the role of advising the CEO. Yes, he has worked in identifying priority budgetary requirements for annual submission of performance measures and budgetary provisions. He also assisted with writing research and development proposals. Dr. Tawati has Dr. Tawati has a sound understanding of agricultural science with several years of scientific research at the international level. This included scientific research in Japan at the Kochi University, United Kingdom at Bristol University, in France at Bayer Research Science, with collaborative research in New Zealand at Auckland University. So ladies and gentlemen, I have pleasure in now asking Dr. Tawati to take the floor and give us his address on this particular subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prasad, for that. I want to first give thanks to Dr. Tandon and the Honorable Reddy. It was very interesting listening to the talks that you, and I do have a lot of questions, and especially seeking knowledge from you gentlemen. Director of UNESCO Office to the Pacific Islands, Canadian Commission for UNESCO, UNESCO chairs and representatives, Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Talofa lava. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about open science beyond access. But firstly, I want to give our heartfelt condolences to those who have lost loved ones to the COVID-19 pandemic. We are going through tough times, and our unity will bring comfort and assistance to those in need. What is SROS? For those who have not heard of the Scientific Research Organization of Samoa, SROS is a government organization with a vision to develop Samoa through science, technology, and innovation. SROS's function is to provide scientific and technical research and develop technologies that would add value to the goods and services provided by the private and public sectors, and ultimately contribute to the national economy of Samoa. Areas of research are environment and renewable energy, plant and post-harvest technologies, food science and technology, and agriculture research. To the topic at hand, it is without doubt that many of us have come through the educational system of closed science, which requires good collaborations and subscriptions to get access to the latest publications. The research was carried out is only available to those with the correct connections or access. Now let me talk about the topic at hand, that is open science, which explores different forms of openness to serve the common good. There are three forms of openness from the document that was provided: openness to publications and data, openness to society, and openness to excluded knowledges and epistemologies. Sorry about that. I feel that it is important to mention the critical need to address gaps in diversity in science. That is promoting science and scientific research among historical marginalized groups of people, and inclusion to ensure individuals have equal access to opportunities and empowerment. SROS's interest goes towards openness to greater openness to knowledges and systems of thought that come from our own people. Scientific research and data produced from the islands are often ignored from mainstream science, although this knowledge may be complementary to existing knowledge in published scientific material. Could it be that local island research are not being produced in sufficient volumes for it to be noticed? Is it possible that we may have been silenced because we do not follow the standard law of science? And now, given the complex COVID-19 situation, should we now be exploring possible avenues for opening science to allow for openness to indigenous knowledge? I totally agree that we must return to the conventional ethics of research, which considers science as a common good, and that scientists must collaborate to advance knowledge, whatever their countries or beliefs. I greatly support the consideration for UNESCO. We support all the considerations mentioned in the document, especially consideration 1, that governments, universities, and research funders should support strategies and systems for the co-creation and sharing of knowledge that are co-designed for and with communities they serve. What does it mean for in Samoa? There's a growing insurgence and recognition for traditional medicine that is recommended by traditional healers. Why has this been? It is because there has been an increase in medical cases that traditional medicine has proven to help tremendously. So now we know for sure that these traditional medicines work. This is where SROS comes in. We are presently studying the locally available plants and sea creatures and working with the traditional healers to understand potential of the plants and sea creatures, then carry out scientific questioning and experiments so that the information is accepted. Will it be accepted if our organization writes the paper? Or would the organization require collaboration from reputed authors for it to be published? Is this research called traditional knowledge, or should it be correctly called traditional science? These are the questions. What does it mean for small island developing states? From the SID standpoint, possible relevant scientific information available only in journals that could be beneficial to ongoing research and relevant for educational programs is out of reach. Either the information is copyrighted, held up in journals in developed institutions, or costly to acquire. SIDS is looking for equality in the scientific research arena. Information that may be life-saving to others can be shared. With the growing economies in SIDS, national focus continues to be on policies surrounding trade and environment, and lesser attention to science. Now I ask, should there be national science hub made of science-minded individuals, and for these hubs to communicate regionally and internationally? Should these hubs provide sound science policy advice that informs leadership? Well, it seems that I have raised more questions than answers, but as one professor told me, you know you are on the right track when you have more questions than answers. I would like to thank you all for your attention and for UNESCO for the opportunity. Special thanks goes to Nisha and the UNESCO team here in Samoa. Wish you all the best and be safe. Faftai from Samoa. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tawati. Really appreciate your views. Nisha, you would like to say something at this stage as you...
Thank you very much, Rajendra. I just want to also acknowledge that among the attendees present from 14 different Pacific SIDS today, we have a few professors, like Professor Peter Lockhart, who is the chair of UNITWIN on Science, Technology and Innovation, which covers the Massey University, USP and NUS. We also have Ms. Anzila Jokam, the Permanent Secretary of Ministry of Education, Heritage and Arts of Fiji. I see Professor Elizabeth Holland from Tongan government. Of course, our dear Lucy is there, but we also see Tania Lakula. So there are quite a few esteemed academicians, researchers online, and two had to leave because of poor connection. I have their questions. So if it is all right with you, maybe we can invite some of our attendees to share their observations and not just move in a question and answer format.
Surely we can do that. Yes, I also saw them, and I wish to really hear their views as well. So if anybody would like to really speak, especially the ones that you have mentioned just now, I think we are not here to really defend or attack against one another, but to really try and see how we can move forward. So I'm sure Honorable Minister Dr. Reddy has mentioned some very practical issues that even I faced in my previous job, and I think a lot of government civil servants face as well. So it's not something new, but of course there has been progress in various areas. And Dr. Tawatu also mentioned certain things that I think we need to consider. So I'd like to now open the floor for anybody who wishes to make comment, add or not really challenge, but if you have other views to express. I've seen there's from Lucy Moala Mafi of Tonga, the Secretary General of the UNESCO National Commission Office. So she has got a comment there as well. So if anybody has read that, probably you wish to take the floor.
Rajendra, there are two other questions. So
Yes,
please,
sure.
we'll come back to these questions, but let's invite if Professor Holland or Professor Lockhart, if you would like to make any observation based on what has been discussed.
Oh, thank you. I'd like to say I've enjoyed very much the presentations, and I think that I think that the idea of open science is a wonderful idea, and what I personally don't know though is what are the institutional barriers that need to be overcome. You know, I'm a professor in a university. I'm well aware of the competition there exists between institutions, for example, New Zealand tertiary institutions. But I'm not sure what it would take to initiate a program of open science. I think it would be so good, and that we could greatly sort of strengthen a network of academic collaboration if we could more freely share information. And so I personally need to better understand the barriers for that, but I would be interested in working towards trying to overcome some of those barriers. Perhaps some of the other speakers may have some thoughts on how you would begin to bridge the issue of or deal with the issue of interinstitutional competition, and is it not possible to still share information and institutions still you know, seek to be competitive in that they try and attract students competitively, but perhaps we could still manage a program where we share information more freely than we do. So I'm intrigued by that issue. I don't know enough to really comment on what the barriers are, but I would very much like to engage in discussion about that and contribute if there's anything that I could help to do. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lockhart. Angela Jochen, Permanent Secretary from Fiji. Over to you, Angela.
This is Angela Jochen. I'm still at USB until next week, but I just wanted to, make a few points. The first one is most of you should be aware, I'm sure you are aware, that there is a Pacific Islands University Research Network, PIRE, that was set up back in 2012 with the idea for the universities in the Pacific. Actually, currently it has 13 universities as members from within the Pacific to do the kinds of things some of the kinds of things that we're discussing today. So I think there is currently a mechanism which could be utilized a whole lot better. In terms of sharing resources, which the Honorable Minister talked about, if we can just talk about Fiji, yes, it is a shame that universities don't collaborate as much, but I think that's a discussion that needs to be held, because as a government that funds the 3 universities, there's no reason why the government may want to insist, I guess, on putting its resources where it's most effective. So that's something that I think we need to discuss in Fiji and see how we can do that. But I am very aware that those universities that don't have resources are critically at a loss in terms of having this kind of resources, which is not right. So I just wanted to alert you to the PION, which may be something that we should probably look at a bit more closely to see how we may use that as a mechanism to get universities working together.
Thank you very much, Angela. In fact, it's a very good point that you mentioned PIRON. It's a network that UNESCO was instrumental in its formation, and we tried to have it, it went a bit quiet for a few years and then again picked up from 2017, and of course now has picked up pace, and definitely it's a mechanism that we should look at. We also had hands up from two of our national commissions. Let me first invite Lucy, if she would like to make her point now. She had a question for Honorable Minister Reddy. Lucy Moala Mafi from Tonga.
Thank you, Nisha. Yeah, I was just commenting on the presentation by Honorable Reddy on the fact that there's so many research findings and theses that are sent to our governments, but we're not too sure how much of it is read or put into practice to influence policy development. In Tonga's case, there's a perceived assumption that the study of science is declining or students are losing interest. And perhaps we are thinking of looking into the curriculum and to see how relevant it is. And also, probably one important issue is career days for high school students. Maybe not to leave it until the end of the high school cycle, but it would be better to do career open days at the beginning of secondary school, so that it will facilitate students to make a choice on what career path that they would follow. In science, there seems to be very little understanding of science. I think it's taken to be general science, but students should know more about the different disciplines and what career they could do along those disciplines. And I'm also talking about our proposed science and technology innovation policy, which has been stalled for some time. I think this is mainly due to the work overload of the coordinator. There's a lot going on in ministries in Tonga relevant to science, but just getting the policy to be finalized and adopted, it's taken longer than expected. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. And before I ask Honorable Minister Reddy to respond to it, and also Dr. Tuati may consider pointing out, I'm going to read out a question which is from one of the attendees who could not stay connected due to the poor quality of internet. And the question was specifically for Honorable Reddy. It is, what steps the government may take to reimagine and redesign education systems, not just at the school level, but also at higher education level and research in science, as a way to create a supportive environment for open science. So I think Lucy's point and this question have a lot of similarity. over to you, Dr. Honorable Minister Reddy.
Thank you, Anisha. Lucy mentioned about, again, the issue that I raised, that the output that we are creating, or the output that is being created, the knowledge that is being created at the university level, that is not being passed on to the policymakers. I'm glad to see that Tonga is making some effort in terms of getting the thesis to the policymakers. Obviously, not all ministers and policymakers would read the whole entire thesis, though. So what I suggest would be that, what you need is a simple, a couple of pages of simpler version, more palatable to policymakers on the research findings. So that will be a good start. I see feature articles, like in Fiji, we see feature articles on key topics being written by academics in the newspaper, which is a very good initiative. Academia from USP and FNU, University of Fiji are doing that. And it's in a simple language, digestible by most of the people, the policymakers as well as others out there. So that is a good thing. Again, seminars, panel discussion, public lectures, debates. You rarely see any debate. I have not seen. I know when I was at USP, I engaged in debate with a professor of economics. Sorry, when I was at FNU, that's the last debate we had. I engaged in a debate on minimum wage with a professor from USP, and that's the last debate. Formal debate chaired by another deputy vice chancellor at FNU. I was at FNU, and there was this professor of economics at USP, and he opposed what I had proposed. I said in email, and the email was circulating. Then I challenged him. I said, look, let's have a debate, a public debate. And we had it at a major, largest lecture theatre at FNU. It was full. I mean, let's have that thesis and research article, get a different, simpler version, and pass it to policymakers, pass it to our executive, the permanent secretaries, look, I mean, dump it on us, and let us then say, oh, enough, we got enough. Now, the other question that Nisha posed about, someone said that what can be done to get universities to give value for, in terms of assisting governments and policymakers. Go back to the grant agreement. The universities are being provided with grant by the government. Relook at the grant agreement and say what kind of output you expect from the university. So, for example, we're giving so much money to universities, but again, we have to hire consultants to do research for us. I think we can build into the grant agreement that universities should provide us with a list of expertise they have and the kinds of research work they can do for us, rather than us spending the money again, giving the money to someone else, so they can do it on their own university time, which we are giving grant money for. And there you go, the university can say this is how meaningful we are. So get back to the grant agreement, and that's where we need to give details about what we expect from the universities in terms of assisting us in policy making, in terms of knowledge creation, the kinds of research we want to do, and we want, and of course, university academics should not be tied to doing only that kind of research, which I would oppose. But this is the kind of expertise we need, and universities must hold this expertise. Universities, these are the kind of areas that we want more research to be done. And secondly, in terms of what kind of skill sets that we want to see universities, devoting more resources, so that because these skill sets are deficient. So the grant agreement should not be a static document. The moment it's a static document written some time back, the grant agreement should evolve over time, and the output should be relooked at, every second, third year, so that, universities remain relevant in terms of delivering on to what we are paying them for. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Reddy. We have one question in writing and a speaker who from Solomon Islands, Christina Bokolo. Christina, would you like to go with your question for the panel, please? Surjit or Niharika, if you can please put Solomon Islands NatCom as a speaker so they can speak.
Yes.
Hello. Hello, Nisha, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sound is booming, Christina. Please go ahead. So I think we have lost Christina. The question, in the meantime, I can ask the question which is there, and this is for Dr. Tuati, is what is his perspective on technological advancements and use of technologies, new technologies like artificial intelligence or Internet of Things, to be used in promoting open science with regard to traditional knowledge, in particular the medical know-how passed on from generations. So Dr. Tuati, you may wish to just park this question because I see Christina online.
Thank you, Nisha. Thank you, Christina, for the question. This is how in Samoa, the way we're doing the research right now is we are looking in towards the future and we're looking at to the past at the same time. Now, I've mentioned this wording quite a few times, and what it means is we're using the latest technology. Well, we're looking at, we're very thankful for having quite a bit of molecular equipment with us and some analytical equipment with us. And we are using these equipment to actually test what the local traditions or local science is coming up with, and it's actually complemented each other. And I think this is the way going forward, is because a lot of the science, they need a scientific justification. So we're aiming to put it together, or we are doing it right now, is we're getting the local knowledge, we're working with them, but we're really explaining to the person that by no chance we're trying to exploit you. If you have any concern whatsoever, then we cease the discussion, and we make sure that you're very comfortable with what you're sharing with us. Now, we always tell them to look into what happens in 1 year's 100 years. I mean, how can we move forward? Is information you have, is it going to be lost? Can we combine it with some other traditional science that's out there? Can we work together? We're looking at the three main things that Trust is top priority right now is cancer research, type 2 diabetes research, and antimicrobial research. And all of this, we're working very closely with the local healers, and they're providing a lot of this information. Some, from a scientific point of view, it might be skeptical, it might be questionable. And this is why I'm saying, why don't we combine the different scientists and make the information available? We don't want to hold it and then find out, our neighbor or something having problems, and we're sitting with the plants or some organism that could be of great help. I hope this tries to answer the question, but you can re-ask it again if I didn't really answer it completely. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tuati. I see that Solomon Islands colleague has not been able to join back, and I do not see any hands up. So I can sort of hand back to Rajendra because I practically hijacked the discussion session from him.
It's okay, you are boss, so it's fine. I have Dr. Tandon wanting to comment on some of the issues that have been raised up. So, Dr. Tandon, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Nisha and Rajendra, for facilitating this fascinating conversation. I have just one important point referring to what Minister Reddy was saying. You know, when we talk about co-construction of knowledge, what we mean is that research agenda could be shared and discussed with other stakeholders. And this is where policymakers can also play a role, as Professor Reddy was explaining. This is where, as Professor Tuati was saying, you could co-construct knowledge with local healers. Difficulty has been that in training of young researchers in science, we only train them to look at the discipline and the research question emanating from their supervisors and domain knowledge that their supervisors have, instead of looking around to society and then framing a research question in partnership. The policy uptake research shows that when research is framed in consultation with policymakers, national or regional, then the findings have a meaning. The second part that we need to train our researchers in is how to disseminate their findings to non-scholarly journals. Like Professor Reddy was saying, many of them are not even trained. They don't know how to share findings with the same community from which they collected data, because they only are trained to write academic papers. So I think small steps can be taken and a collaborative framework can be developed, as Professor Reddy was saying, to identify research questions over the next 2, 3, 4 years. And students would actually like to contribute to creating new knowledge which is actionable by communities, actionable by policymakers, actionable by government. So I think there is a lot of value in looking at framing of research in collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tandon. Now I'd like to open the floor to anybody else who wishes to speak or say something at this stage. I think we have already gone above time. So before we wrap up, if there's somebody else who wishes to speak at this stage, I'm still not able to get Elizabeth, or Professor Elizabeth, she's online somewhere, but she's been muted somehow. I don't know whether we can open it up for her to speak, or anybody else that wishes to speak at this stage.
I see Taniela Kula's hand up. Taniela, would you like to go?
Yes, Taniela.
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, sure.
Okay. Thank you for the coordinators for coordinating this meeting, and I just wanted to join the discussions. I think all the speeches that's been delivered has contributions to the topic. I've been trying to follow and to see it from my point of view. So decolonization of knowledge and open science. I think the traditional knowledge is a major topic on this thread. But from my experience in Tonga, traditional knowledge are there. The science of those knowledge is the gap. So the people in Tonga who are now educated in science can restructure those traditional knowledge and demonstrate or prove to the elders with those knowledge how true it is. So in my experience, and with my background, going around consultations since 2002 for the 18 years now, elders appreciate how I can demonstrate or describe the science behind their original or traditional knowledge. But to decolonize our knowledge or the Pacific knowledge from the Western knowledge that we have been tied to for many years, I think the ties will always be there, because the traditional knowledge is passed through verbally and from generation to generations on demonstrating, but through the Western knowledge, the academia, knowledge is transferred through writings, which I think writing and reading is something that needs to be incorporate more or enhance more in the Pacific, so that we are able to translate our traditional knowledge into paper, and that can last for more generations to come. But I appreciate the discussions today on how we can merge the two and how new scholars can come up and merge with the communities to extract their knowledge. So we are on the right path there. It's also been noted by my colleague Moala, the needs to promote science in high school and all levels. And part and parcel, there needs to be more physical activities in all levels of education, early childhood, ECS, and also through primary school and high school, more outdoors activities rather than just focusing on indoors. We can have more practical. I think more practical will enhance more the science and the scientific capability of students, rather than having just students who are smart in picking up through reading. We can also encourage and expand the number of science talented students through practical work in the outdoors. But going back to the topic of science and decolonizing knowledge, I think you can never decolonize, but you can try to merge the Western knowledge and the traditional knowledge. So these knowledge can be validated locally and also internationally. But there's certain level of decolonization and being independent knowledge for the Pacific, or then being fully independent, but we should find the commonalities and the ties and just maintain it as pure knowledge rather than having Pacific knowledge and Western knowledge. But it's good to have experts in the Pacific to recognize them for what we know and what we have learned from our ancestors. So I'm speaking in supporting decolonization, but at the same time, we should find the two being tied and being linked. Yes, but sorry, but thank you again, Rajendra, for inviting me to join the discussion.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment before we start to close. Samoa has a slightly different setup between science and policy. The government of Samoa, or the policy makers, because SRAS is a government-run research organization, it's the policy makers that tend to instruct us of which area we should look into, because all the different parts of the country are, shall I simply put, kind of complaining, or some issues are being raised, and they're going to the policymakers. And this is when the policymakers then give us directives and said, look into this area. There needs to be an export. There's overproduction here. Look to some value-added products. Some issues are coming with these products. Look into food safety. There are ways that how can you increase production for something? Is our water still safe? Is the front of the seafront, is it still safe for children? Give us a report. So this is how we're doing. As we work with our projects, we're working with the existing mandate we have. And in addition, directly with the policymakers. And that's quite as good for us because it means that the work that we're doing right now is needed and they're actually waiting for it. So, but there's no, they don't, now this is the good thing about it, they don't put pressure on us to say, well, we need it right now, because we try to explain to them this is a science and the results will come when the results come. Don't put pressure on the results because, as we know, that's not a good thing. And there's been a really nice working together of the policymakers and our organization. I just want to point that out because it's slightly unique in a way. Thank you.
Yes, unique, but also pretty ideal. I don't think many countries can achieve that kind of arrangement. I think our universities and they are pretty much independent to carry out whatever they want to do, as long as I think the money that is provided by government is spent in the right for the right purpose, as stipulated in the agreements. Okay. Is there anybody that wishes to speak at this stage?
Rajendra, I think Dr. Tandon wanted to respond to Len's point, and then Jutta had his hands up.
Yeah, so Jutta's hands up.
I think we should go to Jutta. I have commented on it in the interest of time.
All right. So, Jutta, would you like to ask your question, please? If he has disappeared and there is no further question, probably, Rajendra, we should try to wrap it up.
Yes, I think, Dr. Tandon, do you want to make any final comments, remarks before we finish? Especially in terms of outcome of this particular session and where we should be heading for after the consultations today.
Okay, well, I'll just make a quick comment on that. We will produce a short, quick report out of this, share it with you and Nisha to take a look at it and improve it. Any comments? All the 11 webinars that are going to be completed by 3rd week of November. Each webinar has its own report that have been shared with the regional UNESCO commissions as well as with the national governments of the region. We will do the same. We will request you to share that report with your various national governments of the region. But we will also synthesize those 11 reports and produce a document for UNESCO Paris and the advisory committee, which Dr. Shahbaz referred to in his comment. There is an advisory committee on open science, and we hope to share that with them before Christmas, 1st week of December, so that they can mull over the voices that are coming from the region. We expect about 700 plus new voices through these consultations around 11 webinars. So that is what we promise to do, and we will share it with you, both the regional as well as the global synthesis by early December, regional one next week. Thank you. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you, Dr. Tandon. I haven't really discussed with any of the panelists or even with Nisha, but those that have attended today may have some comments to offer, some views. I think we should open to them for a few days, probably 7 days or so, or towards the end, till end of next week, so that they can provide any comments. Especially, I'm hoping that our academic side, especially Professor Elizabeth Holland and others that even from within UNESCO that have not spoken from their various sectors now, points of view. So they could probably comment and then we'll sum it up and then a report will be produced by Priya as mentioned by Dr. Tandon. Nisha, is it okay with you?
very much, Rajendra. I think it's good to close now.
Yes, yeah. Okay, so without me commenting anything, I think we have taken quite a bit of time. There has been quite a lot of views and ideas and even suggestions made. Still, I'm trying to really digest all this, and especially where our traditional knowledge sector falls into, and how we can capture and then make it all freely available. Final comments and then close this particular session. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajendra. Just as a matter of closing, a few observations and comments from me. Before I begin, though, I would like to thank Honorable Minister Mahendra Reddy, Dr. Siu Chuati, Dr. Rajesh Chandan, and our colleagues from various Pacific countries who are with us, and some of us who dropped out because of connectivity issues. I thank everyone very much for their active participation. It was a short notice. And also to the colleagues who have stayed online listening to the conversation. In particular, to academics from universities in the Pacific who have shown interest, and as we can see from the number of questions that are coming up despite interruptions and connectivity issues, that the interest is there. Probably we need to plan it together with our stakeholders as to how best we can convene virtually again. Going through the discussions we heard today on the topic of open science, clearly all the panel members saw value of open science in helping enhance the quality of research, maximizing value and potential impact of scientific research on society. And as we can see from some of the comments, there's a lot of interest in scientific research to the extent that it contributes to policymaking or to public good. Honorable Minister Reddy highlighted that dialogues like this are needed to bring policymakers, research institutions, academia, also the private sector, to critically consider standards for evaluating scientific research, what good it is serving, as well as the emphasis on research institutions to pursue common good. And I would say these discussions are also needed to understand what Professor Peter Lockhart said is how the common good can be realized and how science communication can involve citizens, and science does not remain a mystery, not an enigma, rather it becomes part of everyday practice of a society. We also heard that open science sometimes raises doubts, in particular in regard to traditional knowledge. But it is not always for a reason like this. This was highlighted in our speakers' comments that there is a resistance to open science because it takes away secrecy around scientific knowledge. And as social beings, we are also conditioned to believe that what is common is not necessarily of value. So these doubts may be genuine, may not be genuine, but they need to be addressed. And we need to transparently consider research integrity and differentiated quality measures for different types of research. Because we heard about scientific research, we also heard about social sciences. And clearly when we say open science, the interdisciplinarity has to come through as well. Another important point made by Dr. Tewati is that science is not just research coming from institutions. Science is also spread in oral traditions. And as Dr. Tandon pointed out, in linguistically diverse societies, which do not speak modern international languages like English or French or Spanish. So while this webinar is closing, I believe our task of working with the national stakeholders for the implementation of open science is in front of us. We need to consider, given specific context and given distances we have, that what elements will constitute open science ecosystem for this vast region on this planet Earth. Usually, open science ecosystem comprises of identifiers, metadata, issues around vocabulary, citations, repositories, and other forms of ICTs that form the data infrastructure. How it would look like in the Pacific. And given Pacific's small economies or a small scale of economies, this ecosystem cannot be very rigid. It will have to remain adaptive. It will have to be open to new standards or need for new standards. At the same time, like everywhere else, it must be prepared to respond to emerging ethical dilemmas. We heard a few suggestions. One came from Dr. Tewati about national science hubs connecting to one another to produce regional good. And we also heard from Dr. Honorable Minister Reddy about the need for coming together for regional good production. So science has to serve the agenda of national interest, and I would define national interest as equitable national development, which is inclusive, diverse, and participatory in nature. And probably I would be corrected by many others, but let me not go into that. I think the point is that irrespective of a scale of economies, research still requires policy. In the case it is open science policy, it will not mean that it doesn't require research integrity or measures of research integrity. And open science, as Dr. Tandon pointed out, is highly dependent on participation at individual and community level, and also on a culture that is genuinely curious, open, and questioning. So this brings me to the last point, which was discussed today by the panel, and which was related to science education and open science skills, which are essential for open science to work. While we did not have detailed discussion on this, we did hear a bit about ICTs and data literacy, knowledge curation and harvesting, and use of existing mechanisms like PIRON. So in the closing, I would like to thank by our key speakers, Honorable Minister Reddy, Dr. Rajesh Tandon, Dr. Chowati. Also my dear colleagues, Shahbaz, who is also a professor at the Australian National University, and Rajendra, who I keep remembering is the weatherman of Fiji, for this enriching session. And I apologize to those attendees who wanted to speak but could not speak. I wish we could do something about improved connectivity. And in the end, I want to thank the two co-chairs, their institutions, PRIA and the Victoria University, the Canadian Victoria University, not the New Zealand or Australian one. Specifically also thank our Canadian Commission for UNESCO for acting like a stork that dropped this baby on us. We fumbled a little bit, but we finally managed to get through it. And definitely we are going to follow up. So thank you everyone for your participation, for a very enriching session. And I wish everyone a very good evening here in Samoa. Fafetai Lava, Vinaka, Shukriya, thank you.
Thank you, Nisha. And without further ado, I'd like to now declare this particular event closed. Thank you. All the best to all of you.
Thank you very much, Rajendra and Nisha and all colleagues.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wonderful conversation. Thank you.
And our apologies for any lapses, Dr. Tandon.
Not at all, not at all, not at all. We are in it together. Lapses are universal.
Thank you very much.
Thank
you,
you.
Niharika
Wonderful.
and Surijit.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Good evening and thank you.
Thank you, Rajendra.
Thank you, Tanyala.
Vinaka.
Minaka, and I need to hear from you on the STI policy, man. Thank you.
Yes, I will send you soon the proposal. Thank you.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Malo.
Yeah. Elizabeth, if you're hearing me, sorry for, I think maybe STI did not give you that particular privilege. I didn't know.